Here, we are reading through Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians. And we are right now kind of pausing to slowly transport ourselves through Ephesians chapter 5, talking about the topic of marriage. Okay? And I said last week we were going to get into the controversial stuff. I didn't have it in me, so we're going to wait another week for that. To get into the S word. But today, I just want to talk about God's plan for mankind. Oh, Tom, don't worry. You'll be here next weekend, right? Oh, it's a 3-day weekend. Who won't be here next weekend for the 3-day weekend?
Oh, you might have to do it. You have to push it a week then.
We may have to just do a fun thing next weekend, maybe.
Gold star for everybody who's actually here.
Yeah, gold stars.
Yeah, gold stars. If you're
bonus material next week. We'll do the bonus album next week and then come back. Okay.
I am going to do my best rendition of Pastor Parker. Okay, weak albeit. All right, but if you've ever watched Pastor Parker preach, in addition to his 3 topics of alliteration, he also loves to have statistics in his sermons as well. Right? So I loaded myself up with some statistics today. And this is according to a Bowling Green University study. Who knows where Bowling Green is? Not you guys. Anybody else? It's in the great state of Kentucky. It is the headquarters of Corvette. That's where Corvettes are made. Chevrolet Corvettes are made there. Anyway, that's neither here or there. According to a study in 2010, so this is 3 years ago, marriage rates are at an all-time low. We'll get into specifics in a minute on that. The median age for women marrying is 27, and for men it's 26. And that is the oldest age since statistics were gathered and kept on this particular topic. In the 1920s, out of every 1,000 women of marrying age, so per 1,000, 92 would marry each year. 92 out of 1,000. Today that number is a third of that. It's 30 out of every 1,000 that are getting married each year now. In 1960, 15% of all adults had never been married. Like, whatever adult begins at 18, I guess. All United States citizens above the age of 18, 15% of them had never been married. Okay?
That means 85%
had been married. Now that number is double. It's 30%. Okay? And now, quiz time. We're going to play a little game of over-under. I don't know if anybody's ever been to Vegas to play a little over-under. We're going to play a little over-under today. Okay? The statistic I'm looking for is what percentage of all U.S. births are out of wedlock. Who wants to volunteer a number they think might be accurate?
45.
45? 45.
62.
Okay.
53.
So we got, let's be the underside, let's be the overside. How many say it's less than 45%? 1, 2, 3. Wow, you guys are pretty discouraging. That means everybody else, some big number. It's above 45%. Dave, you were pretty close. It's 41%. It is lower. Barely, though. Barely.
Not in Mississippi.
I need to break it down by socioeconomic and everything. There's ways to break this down. But overall, 41% of the babies born in the United States of America are born in families that are not married. Okay? And Sherry and I went to a class this past week on how to be a better Sunday school teacher. We were encouraged to go because apparently maybe you guys have been talking to the staff saying, you need to send these guys someplace. But the guy, it was broken down by age group, and so the guy that we went to hear talked a lot about millennials. So you guys are millennials, right? Have you heard that phrase used to describe who you are, millennials? Not you.
I'm pre-millennial.
Okay, so millennials are anybody born, like they say, from 1980 to 2000. Okay? And The cultural habits of millennials are to explain, have a lot to do with these statistics that we heard right here, okay? But it isn't just the millennials. If you look at baby boomers, which I'm at the very tail end, maybe, like the end of the baby boomer age, so me and older people, if you can imagine anybody older. So this is like, your grandparents, all right? 2.75 million baby boomer women are cohabitating. Ugh. That's just yucky. 2.75 million. So it's not just millennials, okay? And there's even a new phenomena. This one might actually appeal to my wife. This one's called living apart together, LATs. So people who are married or just in long-term relationships who live geographically separated. Because they
I just want an office, that's all, just an office, nothing else.
One particular example I read, a couple was trying to figure out how to actually have two separate rooms with a tunnel dug between the two of them. So, these are called LATs, all right? LATs, living.
Brent, you need to correct that statement.
It's going to be on YouTube now. My wife does not actually think that.
Wanting your own closet does not constitute wanting to live separately, thank you.
All right. So now I want to ask you guys. You're the millennials. Why are the statistics so radically different than they've been historically? Why? Why are these phenomena happening? Enlighten me, my young ones.
Just the fact that we're getting so used to things being given to us immediately that when a marriage isn't happy, per se, you wouldn't work on it. It's just, okay, I can leave this and find something better.
And so that might even happen in the dating phase, explaining why they don't even get married to begin with. You know, they just, okay, there's trouble here. Let's
Or
move
I'm
on.
getting what I need, so I don't need to actually make a commitment.
Okay, okay, good.
So I was gonna say it's fear of commitment.
Fear, I'm going to use the word fear a lot here, of commitment. Now, why do you think there is a fear of commitment? That could probably be looked at a little bit even deeper than just a fear of commitment. Why is that? Because one idea I have is you millennials have so many options available to you, man. Like when I was a kid and my dad would go get coffee at the corner coffee shop, he could get it three ways. He could get it black, either the sugar, or the cream of sugar. That's how my dad could get his coffee. But nowadays, man, you guys can get coffee 12 different ways to Sunday. You have options, so many options, and you love your options. The millennials love their options. And I think, correct me if you think I'm wrong, part of the fear of commitment is, what if something better comes along? Maybe?
It's kind of like accepting events on Facebook. We were talking about this on my family reunion. People now are so unlikely to like just leave, like say, oh yeah, I'll go to something, or like I might go to something. Most people are hitting maybe now instead of I'm accepting to go to this. So because they're so caught up in, yes, there may be something
Just
better
can't
that
come
comes
to
along,
that.
or
Who knows?
someone texted me it's something to do this. There's just no really the drive to be connected with one another.
And you can't be for sure who's going to show up for something.
Or it's who you want to be connected with 5 minutes before the event starts.
Right.
Yeah, 5 minutes
Because
before the
someone
event
else
starts.
might be more interesting.
Okay? Anything else? Any other reasons why people are deferring marriage or not even marrying at all?
Could you, yeah, I was going to mention that. What about independence?
Okay, independence. Independence. Don't look at my spelling. Okay, we'll also put autonomy.
Yeah, self.
No, me. I'm a pilot, okay? Stop it. Independence
If
and
you don't say that,
autonomy,
then we're.
okay, as opposed to intimacy and sort of interconnectedness,
Union or
union,
communion?
yes. Alone time versus together time, yes. I would also, some of the other things I thought of that I think probably have to do with this, there's a normalization of promiscuity nowadays. It's normal. It's not a stigma like it used to be. The normalization of illegitimate birth. I mean, the Hollywood couples are showing the world this is a cool, man. This is a good thing. This is the way to do it. There's a normalization of homosexuality. For some men, there's a fear of rejection. And we talked about giving up control of your life. The commitment thing, I've seen so many times guys or even girls are waiting for that perfect person at that perfect time and just waiting and waiting and waiting until that never happens. All right? There's also one other phenomena that is occurring that I think the millennials have become notorious for. I never heard this term until you guys showed up. The bromance. Has anyone never heard of a bromance? You need to hear a new word, the bromance.
Gotta know.
Vaguely.
It's an
When
epidemic.
you walk out the shoot shop next time, look at the solo dunk tank that's waiting, and it's like 14 bro 9 or something.
I think it got painted yesterday.
Did it? Okay. Tim's up on those things.
Sorry.
It's okay.
There's
Guys-
a song, just
guys-
type bromance into YouTube and you'll understand.
Yeah. So what's the phenomenon of the bromance? What's a bromance? Enlighten the guy back there in the corner who's never heard of it.
Wow, nobody even wants to talk.
Come on, man.
Okay, is it like
Sarah, what's a
No, no.
bromance?
I think it's a cop-out.
Okay. It's
Okay,
a
it's a bunch of guys that they get a house and they live together and they all hang out on the weekends and they go out to eat and they drink beer and they make craft beer and they play Halo and they play online Halo and they just all have this and maybe one of them has a girlfriend and she comes over and takes care of all of them sometimes so they don't feel quite so awkward and they go out to dinner and da-da-da-da-da, but then they have their bros.
Yeah. There's a fulfillment that is met in your brothers, your bros. There's
Is
a
this not
fulfillment
the
there.
girls not do bromance?
I don't know, girls. Do you have?
It's not like
We've always done
that.
it. We've
Girls
all
aren't
accepted
staying
it.
home with their girlfriends on purpose on a Friday night to play Halo.
No.
Okay, and if one of them has a boyfriend, they don't take all 5 of their girlfriends out with their one guy, because if they get a guy, they're going to be with the guy.
I was just asking.
Which is why.
We're like on romance right now.
Romance. The bromance. It has a lot of the fulfillment that you would normally find in a dating relationship or then eventually a marriage relationship is just met by having your bros hang out with you and do fun stuff, okay? Now, some people would say these statistics that I laid out here are ambivalent. They are neither good nor bad. They just are what they are. Hey, if people want to get married, what's wrong with that? It's okay, right? But I submit to you that they're bad. Because I believe that God's plan for mankind is marriage. Okay? The first institution created by God occurs when? When did God create the first institution in the human world? Genesis what? What is that? What is that institution? Work, I never thought of work as an institution. I guess maybe because I see it as a necessary evil.
It was a curse.
It was a curse, yes. You can maybe look at it that way. What I'm getting at is what we read last time. Marriage is his first established with multiple people institution, and that is at the end of Genesis chapter 2. For this reason, the man will leave his mother and father, be united to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Okay? So if you go with me that that's the first institution, what's the second institution? And please, no one say prostitution, all right? Because people always say that that's
It's the oldest profession.
the oldest profession, right? What is the second institution that God establishes?
I mean, you don't mind that it's in chapter 1, to be fruitful and multiply.
Okay. Family. Family. Beginning, chapter 4, the command is there, and then, chapter 1, and then in chapter 4, we see Adam and Eve having their first kid. So the family is the second institution created by God, the family. Okay? And there is a purpose. What is God's purpose in creating this institution of the family? What is His purpose in the family? Raise your hand if you're from a family. Okay. What's the purpose of your family?
There's several of them. I mean, one of them is obviously prolonging the race, the human race.
Okay.
And another is to train up our godly seed.
Okay. So, training up your children, that could almost be viewed as the advancement of the gospel. That is the primary first place that the gospel was intended to be, passed from generation to generation. We looked at last week. We looked at Genesis chapter 6, starting verse 4, where it says, "Hey fathers, teach your children about the Lord from the moment you wake up in the morning to the moment you go to sleep at night, when you're walking on the road or when you're sitting at home." Okay, that's family life. That's, I believe, his primary purposes for the advancement of the gospel. Okay, there's also a societal benefit in the family. I was in Maui a few months ago with my family on a little vacation, and so being that I'm the good godly man that I am, when it came time to dividing up the family as to who's going to go do the fun older kid thing and who's going to go do the dull little kid thing, of course, I volunteered to do the dull little kid thing. No, just kidding. I did the, because, whatever, I fly airplanes, we go down all the time, So while my wife and older kids were zip-lining across Maui, I took the kids to a sugar plantation. They make sugar cane, they grow sugar cane and make sugar in Hawaii. So we went to a little museum, a sugar cane museum, and it told the history. It was very interesting. Actually, I liked it. It's okay. Wasn't that bad. But through the course of walking through the plantation owner or plantation manager's house at each station, you learned about the development of the plantation, okay? And so originally, they brought workers in from other countries to work the sugarcane fields, but they brought only single guys. And they were finding they were having all kinds of carousing during the off hours, okay? There were fights breaking out. There was drunkenness. It just wasn't going too well in the plantation. So they said, what we're going to do? We're going to start hiring and bringing in families. We're going to have families now be the building block of our plantation. And for the single guys, we're going to, bust in some single girls. Maybe they can get to know them and maybe get married. Because they knew that married people are going to be more stable. They're not going to go out carousing, and they're not going to cause as much trouble. And that's been true of all society. So when you hear someone on the radio talking about the decay of the family is going to harm our society, that's why, because the stability will be missing without the obligation that a husband and wife have to each other to be true and to work for each other and raise their kids well. So that, I believe, is the other purpose why God created the family as his second, actually entering into that institution, if you will. All right? And just another thought on the bromance. All right? Although God did create friendship, same-sex friendship for a purpose, there's a Bible verse that says, there's a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Jonathan and David were great friends. Paul and Barnabas, for a while, were good friends. God never intended the bromance to take the place of male-female romance. When God placed man on earth, where did he place him? In a what? In a garden, not in a farmer's market. Sherry and I were in Oakland a few weeks ago, and we went down to the farmer's market in Oakland, and it was just a great hangout for all the single people who never want to get married, because it's fun to just kind of walk around and sample the little cheese here, and the little olives there, and the little crackers there. It's a fun thing to do when you're not married. Just go hang out with all the single people down there. Yeah, he also, he placed man in perhaps a garden with coffee beans growing, but he didn't place man in a coffee shop. Okay? He placed him in a garden. He didn't place man in a man cave. He placed him in a garden. Okay?
Or a nightclub.
What's that?
Or a nightclub.
Or in a nightclub. And when he saw that man was lonely, he didn't create a broman, he created a woman for Adam. Right? This is all pretty rudimentary stuff, but yet people are dropping out of this whole deal. And here's where I'm hoping that you've placed your rocks and your tomatoes in there. I suggest to you that marriage is God's plan and design and desire for the vast majority of mankind. Okay? In generations past, it was part of the progression to adulthood. You were a kid, and then you got an education, and then you got a job, then you took a wife, and then you had some kids. This was the progression that was just assumed that people would follow. And that is his plan for the vast majority of mankind. But again, fewer and fewer people are entering into it. I think this is a crisis myself. There's a preacher named Mark Driscoll. Has anyone ever heard of Mark Driscoll? Okay, I watch some things of his online every now and then, and he's the pastor of a big church in the heart of Seattle, Washington. Okay, that is probably the capital of singleness in America, the epicenter probably. Okay, and he's got a church full of single people, and he hammers his men all the time. He tells them, I yell at you because I love you. But they'll come to him and they'll say, but Pastor Mark, I can't find a good Christian woman. Okay? So this is what he says to them. He says, the next time you're in church, okay, and you're sitting in your pew, or probably a seat.
So you're out in the lobby drinking coffee.
Yeah. Oh, you're out in the lobby drinking coffee. He says, stand up, holding your Bible, start turning till you see a girl. And then say to her, I have a job and a Bible. Are you interested? If she says no, keep going. Till you find the next one. Okay? Now, okay, maybe that's a little stretch, but I get the point. And here's what I find is a problem. The church, I think the church is partly to blame for this, okay? Get the rocks in that.
Okay.
The church has created this thing that I don't think exists, and I want to hear your opinions on it. Okay? The church has created a new gift. It's called the gift of singleness. I have the gift of singleness. I've heard that so many times in churches. The gift of singleness. So I went to my Bible and I tried to find the gift of singleness in the Bible. This is what I found. In Romans chapter 12, I found the gifts of prophesying, serving, teaching, encouraging, giving money, leadership, showing mercy. In 1 Corinthians 12, in addition to those already listed in Romans, I found the gift of apostles, workers of miracles, healers, administration, and tongues. I did not see listed there the gift of singleness. So what is the gift of singleness? It sounds nice and spiritual, but what is it?
Is that the reference that they make where, in it, I don't know exactly where it is, where they say that some are not supposed to be married? in one of the letters that Paul wrote
Okay,
to one of the churches. I can't.
does anybody know what she's talking about there?
There's one in 1 Corinthians that talks about it's better for you to remain single than to get married, and if you're married, to stay married. I think it's 7 or
It's
10.
in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. It's a long section. If you'd like to read it right now, we could. But I think what you're going to see there is there are two specific things, because Paul can't contradict other scripture. Scripture doesn't contradict Scripture. And I think the greater has to serve, the lesser has to serve the greater. In this particular section in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, okay, one thing Paul says about remaining in the state you are right now is because of this present crisis. There was something going down. Maybe it was the Romans and the destruction of the temple in 70 AD coming. I don't know. But he says, because of this present crisis, it's best, if you're married, stay married. If you're not married, don't get married. Stay as you are.
I will say that in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 6, I think this is where people get it, just so you're clear. It says, now as a concession, not a command, I say, I wish that all were as myself am, but each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. So I think that's where, in this translation, Paul was saying to him, singleness was his gift.
And then the next, in verse 8, it says that they have to, or verse 9, it says they should have self-control if they remain in singleness, which I think
And therein
is
it lies the problem. Therein lies the problem. Okay? That is extremely difficult and it's extremely rare. Paul is, I'm not trying to discount what Paul's saying here. Paul is saying, look, if you're married, you are obligated to care for the interests and the needs of your spouse. And that does detract a little bit from your relationship with the Lord. That's obvious. He's pointing that out. And I think he's saying, gee, I wish you could all be like I am, where I just devote my time to the Lord all the time. But he realizes that that just isn't really the case. That's why he says, exercise self-control. That's why he says to widows, don't get married again, unless you're burning with passion, then get married again.
The vast majority of people that are not getting married are not doing it because they want to serve the kingdom, nor are almost any of them exercising self-control, if you really are defining that according to
Right. The
Scripture.
gift of singleness is never taught like, hey, you are going to choose to be single so that you can just be this intense server of the Lord. I don't hear. I just hear like this is the cards the Lord dealt you. You have to deal with it. That's how I hear it taught.
Yeah, that's the, I like your example on fruits and vegetables in the market. If there was no Walmart and there were no farmers markets and you physically could not buy, barter or steal vegetables, period, guess what you would do eventually? You would plant a garden or you wouldn't eat vegetables. Right? I mean, you would have to grow your own. If you couldn't buy them, then you would have to grow them. And if you couldn't buy meat, then you would have to raise animals and slaughter them in order to get your meat, right? But if you could buy it, then you know the path of least resistance. So the whole gift of singleness, or the fact that people are remaining single, what's the issue here? Why do they do that? I mean, if there was something that you could do somehow, some sort of, I don't know what you would do, but if you could prevent intimacy, sex, if you could prevent, if that was disallowed except within marriage somehow,
People would be getting
people would be getting married.
Yeah.
The
The
reason
Vegas
that
chapels will be full.
the reason that the bromance
because they're all
works.
sitting around the TV too in the bromance.
The reason the
I left that out,
bromance
but
works is because they get to go to the farmer's market. It's because,
You see the analogy of the farmer's market that he's talking about.
because
There's
they get,
access to sexual intimacy in other ways, means, and areas in our society.
that's what makes the
nowadays.
bromance work. If you took that away, the bromance would not work anymore.
Are there any? Okay, let's talk about a few famous single people in the Bible. Okay, we mentioned Paul. But it wasn't all hunky-dory easy for Paul. Paul is the same guy who says he has to beat his body into submission. He is the chief of sinners who does what he doesn't want to do and doesn't do what he wants to do. So I submit to you that singleness was not all that easy for even Paul. Jeremiah, I think Jeremiah was also single. We can research that, but let's face it, he was known as the weeping prophet, okay? So, I mean, what does that tell you about singleness?
Even if it's not true, that was a good joke.
Thank you. And then I had someone tell me, well, Jesus was single. Was Jesus single? Jesus wasn't single. How was Jesus not single?
We are the bride of Christ.
Paul says that we're betrothed to one husband, Christ. He says that in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, I believe. We are betrothed. The bride, the church, is Christ's betrothed. He couldn't have gotten married while he walked this earth because he was betrothed to his bride, the church, and we'll have a wedding feast in heaven one day. This cat left his wife and kids and moved to China.
No, that's David Livingston.
David Livingston, that's who I mean.
Hudson Taylor took his family with him. His wife ended up going crazy. But
Okay, that's fine. That one's okay. David Livingston left his wife and kids and went to Africa. And probably parts of Africa that you've been to as well there.
Yeah.
And maybe he probably was a guy that should have lived a life of singleness because he was that devoted to the Lord. But let's take a look at what Jesus himself said. Now, we read this last time from a different perspective. I want to read it again from the perspective of what we're talking about right now. About, is singleness really an option for large groups of people? This is that section in Matthew chapter 19. And I would like someone to read 19, 3 through 12. Matthew 19, 3 through 12. First one there reads it, that's my rule.
I'll read. 19:3. Some Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?" "Haven't you read," he replied, "at the beginning the Creator created them male and female, and said, 'For this reason a man will leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore what God has joined together, let man not separate.' Why then," they asked, "did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away?" Jesus replied, "Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. It was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, and marries another woman, commits adultery." The disciple said to him, "If this were the situation between a husband and a wife, it is better not to marry." Jesus replied, "Not everyone can accept this word, but only those whom it has been given. For some are Enochs because they were born that way. Others were made that way by men, and others have renounced marriage because of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept."
Okay, so the part I want to key in on here is after Jesus basically laid it down like, hey, in the beginning, once you got married, God's rule was you stay married. He does offer one possible exclusion there. That's a whole another topic for a whole other day. His disciples freaked out. They're like, dude, if marriage is like that, like permanent, it's better to not even get married, right? Basically, that's what they said there, right? Jesus said, this message I'm bringing you, it says, not everyone can accept this word, but only to those to whom it's been given. And then he lays out 3 groups of people to whom that word is not given. So in other words, this word is for everybody else. So the 3 groups that is not given to are eunuchs, because they're born that way. That is somebody who is born with a deformity, sexual deformity, and they're actually unable to participate in marital relations. Okay? Then it says, others were made eunuchs by men. What is that about?
Wasn't it common to castrate them to be servants for the wives in that
Yeah,
area?
it was probably a little, predates Jesus' time, probably a little bit, but yes, Brianna. The men who were in charge of the hundreds of concubines and wives of the kings were castrated so that they wouldn't, have a proclivity to, do what comes naturally. Right? So he's referring to this, and sometimes it's maybe a punishment. Maybe if someone were, caught in that particular sin back in those days, perhaps that was a punishment that was meted out by the Roman government. I don't know. But that's the second group of people that this message isn't for. Okay? I don't think any of us are in either of those two groups yet. Thirdly, the other third group is those who actually renounce marriage because of the kingdom of heaven. That is a better explanation of what people refer to frivolously as the gift of singleness. Okay? This isn't a gift, this is a choice you make. You might be compelled by God to do it, but you make the choice to renounce. I'm going to renounce marriage for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Those are the only groups of people that this message about marriage is for. So if you don't fall in that group, perhaps you're part of the vast majority, and his plan is for you to marry and stay married for life. What do you think about that? Because I think we are making a generation of eunuchs. That's what I think this culture is doing, if you will.
I don't think we're doing that.
I think in a sense, there's this, I don't need marriage, I don't want marriage, I'm
Where's the
not.
tomato?
What's that?
Give me that basket.
Yeah.
No, we have a generation of fornicators is what we have. That's the reality.
Yeah, he's like giving them three options there. That's pretty harsh. He's like, because they were complaining about the marriage issue. And he's like,
Yeah.
well, you could become a eunuch. And there's an option. I think everybody's probably, nobody wants to take that option. Or you could renounce, marriage. But essentially what he's doing is he's taking away
He's taking away the
at
options.
the farmer's market. That's
Well,
what he's
take away the
doing.
farmer's market.
Eunuchs
So you
by
can't-
men be determined now by the world around us. So we're made eunuchs by men. The singleness we are
Yeah.
pursuing, or
That's kind of what I was
It's
getting at. I was
because
trying
of-
to be allegorical there.
like
so,
work
you know.
and
Right. Things are taking the place of, but you're right. You'll fornicate, as you said, the farmer's market.
So you're taking that out, and
Right.
the disciples' response was, "Whoa, you can't do that."
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so they're
like
just
that.
relating the fact that this is an important thing, and so Jesus is kind of basically not giving them the option to go to the farmer's market. Basically, you don't have that option, and they're basically saying this is very difficult. They may not want to.
They're basically saying, let's not get married. They're saying an option should be then, since this is so permanent, let's just not get married. And Jesus says, no, that's not an option.
Or he says, okay, great, you can just be celibate.
It's
then.
an option for these three groups.
Yes.
And
Otherwise,
they're like,
that's not
that's
an option.
worse.
Right.
He rebuffed the disciples. He basically said, no, that's out of there. That way of thinking is out of there. That's not an option. So, men find and take a wife. Women be found and be taken as wives. Okay? Even if it's not the perfect person at the perfect time, because I think this is God's plan for mankind. What say you? Tom?
This is just a question for everybody, this is a thought, because we have, for about the past decade, we've been trying to reach us and the Carlstroms, trying to reach folks of, 22, 3-ish. And so now, since many of them have gone, we know a large group of people who are basically 23-ish to 30. In that age, 31, 32. And many of them are still single.
Mhm.
And then, so some have gotten married. But, the things that you're talking about, I think is good for us to know about the culture. But most folks that we've been involved in don't really necessarily think like that, although there may have been failures, temptations, and issues along the way. But typically, the issue faced there is a desire to get married and it not happening. So that's what I see more often with with the group here. And so I'd be interested as we continue to discuss, why is this so difficult?
Yeah, if you truly desire to marry, why is it not happening?
What is, that's what I would like to hear from you guys, since most of you probably agree with the teaching that's going on. what is the difficulty in finding a mate right now?
I think for women, and it's been kind of emphasized when I was growing up in the church, he made a list of qualities he wanted in a guy. And he like had to be able to fit that list. And I feel like the emphasis on perfection of a spouse, like you were saying earlier, has been put so high that these poor guys can't live up to it because it's just not possible in humanity. And so we're waiting and waiting and waiting for that guy, and if one guy doesn't fit like this certain quality, you know, he gets checked off the list. So
What would be the, and we probably should go do the girls too, because girls are having a hard time living up to some of the expectations guys are placing on them as well, especially with stuff that we could mention, that we'll just roll off on that now, but back to yours. What would you say is up near the top of the list as far as expectations of men for a lady?
I think it was just you did it on your own. Like at Bible camp, they would always say like you should make a list and make sure they follow those like that you find the man that has the qualities you want in a man
But this
that
is
God
your chance, ladies.
puts on your heart. Like it really was preached a lot.
I have lists that I've actually had about 50 girls send me their list, and I actually have it all compiled. It's very interesting.
I'd like to hear the top one or two things, you know, that a woman.
Then I have about
desires
200
in a
lists
man.
from guys. That's
Well, we
really
have some
interesting
girls
too.
here.
I know it.
I mean, like, number one would be like a godly Christian.
Okay, here we go.
obviously.
Mamie's got a godly Christian.
But like, but then you go into if you're being anything, but people's lists get really ridiculous.
Yeah.
You're like, who is this person gonna be?
Like has to like the outdoors and hike and
We're out.
brings me flowers every day.
Has to be has to have all like everything on the spectrum.
Every fruit of the spirit all the time.
Every personality trait is in this one person, and you're like, this is
like
only gonna fill up.
trustworthiness.
What is
and-
number one?
Probably godliness, but I mean
But what
that
does that mean?
Like
Well-
pursues God more than he pursues me. I think was my.
Brad.
But I tell you, for guys,
Again,
almost
like,
all the time on guys' lists, looks is like right near the top, and it looks like that cyber model. And I'm
Okay, that's-
serious.
yeah,
It's,
that's
it
the
is,
other side.
it's in the top 2 on.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, I have 200 lists on my house, and it's almost in the top 2
The
on all.
internet is not helping the ladies, that's for sure.
We probably gotta wrap this up, but I mean, there are, Tom, I talked to these guys, the Christian guys too, and there's one guy I know, he's pining for a wife, he just wants to get married, he just wants this so badly, and he's waiting for the Lord to just deliver him this perfect woman. I'm like, we wait a long time.
Now, maybe when you get to the study where you're talking about the F word there, and then you get into also, that would be probably a good forum to get into this and start talking about the realities of what our expectations are for the ladies and the men, from the ladies. Because I think that's probably something that would be very relevant